Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from AlexMercedCoder.dev, and in this video what I want to do is focus on working with arrays of objects, because this is where like the callback array methods really shine. And again, the callback array methods, these are functions that are built into arrays that generally require you to pass a function as an argument. Okay, and generally, again, it's going to be in this kind of situation where they are really helpful. Okay, so let's just first go over like an array of objects. So the idea is that generally when you're working with like third-party sources of data, so if you're pulling data from a database, okay, generally you're going to get a list of items, like a list of students, let's say. And when you think about it, like a table of students, it's really like a list of records. So generally what's going to happen is that the actual table is an array, and then each record is going to be an object in that array. So essentially this would be like, if you imagine like an Excel spreadsheet, this would be like row 1, this would be row 2, and then these property names are the names of the columns. So you're generally going to get the data like this. Or if you get data from like a third-party source via like a REST or a GraphQL API, you're generally going to get the data again as an array of objects. Okay, generally all with like sort of matching properties. Okay, ideal world. Sometimes you just get a big hodgepodge of information, and that makes it even more worse. But oftentimes when you get the objects, when you get the array of objects from your source, again, either your database if it's your data or a third-party API, you may not have exactly what you want. So in this example, let's take a look at the different objects. Notice that the keys are all uppercase names. That might be really frustrating for me. I'm just like, I don't wanna, I don't want to have to be typing in name uppercase all the time. So this is where like map becomes really useful. So let's talk about array.map first. Okay, what this is going to do is that we are going to pass, it is going to use a function. Well, we will give it a function. Map will loop over the array and pass each item in the array to the function that we give it. Map returns a new array made up of the return value from the callback function, that's the function we give it, for each item. Okay, so essentially basically what we're saying is that we're going to create a function that says, here's what I want you to do to one thing. And then it's going to do that to each thing, and then give us a new array of the changed versions of the thing. Okay, so here we're going to say const like fixed array. So here this variable should have our array of this array fixed. Like we're going to say, hey, I don't like this array this way. I want to make some changes to it. So what I would do is I would say, okay, let's take the array of the original array, and then I'm going to use the map method. Okay, so this map function, and then again, this map function is going to return the new array, which I'm going to store here. Okay, which I then will console log here. Okay, and right now we have to pass to the map function a function. That's the argument that it takes. So it takes a function. Okay, right now this function returns nothing. So technically what's going to happen is going to return undefined, undefined, undefined. So when I console log this, I'm going to get back an array of undefined. So let's just prove that that's the case. So let's see here, node array of objects, and so you get an array of undefined, undefined, undefined. Because each time the function ran, because we use this function first on the first item, then the second item, and then the third item, and each time it just returned nothing, so it returned undefined. So now watch what happens if I just return 1 arbitrarily. I'm just going to return the number 1. I get an array of 1s, because again, what map is really returning is just an array of the return values of that function being used once per thing in the array. And there's 3 things in the array, as we can see up here. Okay, but really what's going to happen is that this function is going to receive the old version of the object. Okay, so that means in the first loop it's going to get this version of the object, and what I want to do is return the new version, or the new thing that I want in the new array. It doesn't have to be an object, but in this case I do want an object. So I'm going to say, hey, I'm going to put this on another line. Let's break this up a little bit, make it easier to read. And I want to return a new object. And in this new object, I don't want there to be an uppercase name property. I want there to be a name property. And the value of that name property should be the older version, the old version of the object's name property. So I'm saying, hey, this new object's lowercase name property will equal the value of the uppercase name property on the old version of the object. And then I just do this again for the other two properties. So I'm going to say, hey, this one's age property is going to equal the old version of the object dot age, and email will equal old version dot email. Okay, let me just put the comma right here. There we go. And again, how do I know where does this old version variable come from? I declare it as a parameter to the function that I'm passing to map. Okay, so map's receiving this function, and that argument is sort of like, essentially this is basically a kind of like a for of loop that returns you an array. Okay, so that's all fun and good. Now, if I really wanted to, I could also track the index of the array. So with a lot of these methods, like there's this, you can define a second parameter to receive the index. So if you want to get like 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, I don't really need that in this situation, so I'm not going to define that, but just so you're aware of it. And now let's see what happens when I console log this. And see, now I get an array. So you see, like, here's the old version array where everything was uppercased. And then see, we get a new version of the array where everything is lowercase after map. Okay, that's, so the old version still exists. So like the array of objects still is all uppercase, but now I have a fixed version saved in this variable fixed array, and then I can work with that going forward. Okay, so that's what map does. It allows you to sit there and say, you're saying, based on this function, I want to map this new array is the result of mapping the values from the old array based on this function. So they essentially say, hey, if I put this item through this grinder, what comes out on the other side, that's what goes in the new array. And your grinder is the function that you've passed into map. So that's map. Really useful if you need to make changes to like every item in the array. That's when you use it. Now, what if I wanted to now go loop over each item and then console log it? Okay, well then we have array.forEach. So this is essentially like a for of loop where you can loop over every item. So literally like anything you can do here, you can pretty much do with a for of loop. There is one nice thing, or you can just do it with a standard for loop. But all it does is loop over each item, runs the function. Okay, so we're going to give it a function just like we did with map. So the only difference here is not going to return no value, so it returns nothing. Okay, so there's nothing for me to save in a variable in this function. Returns nothing. So this way I'll use the fixed array, because that's the array we have with all the fixed values. And then I'll use the for each method. And this also takes the function. Okay, and whatever this function does, this function will receive, okay, the array item. So basically, and again, on the first loop, it'll receive the first object in the array, and the second loop, it'll receive the second object in the array, and that'll be inside this variable array item. And just to show you that, let's console log it. So literally what's going to happen is on each loop, I'm just logging the array item. Okay, so if I open this up, okay, so you see here, I'm just console logging each item one by one. And that's the for each. So it's literally just a loop. So to me, once I learned the for each loop, that oftentimes became my go-to loop tool if I'm looping over an array. Because the one nice thing about this that you can't do with a for of loop is that I can define the index. So what if I want, so I can define a second parameter, I can receive the index as a second parameter, and I can console log, the index, and I'll do the index right before. So I'll do this, and now watch the result. So you see like the item at the 0 index is this object, the item at this index is that object, and okay, that's pretty nice. Okay. Now, another fun one is filter. Probably filter and map I use so much on a regular basis that it's crazy. Filter. What this does is, again, given a function, if the function returns a truthy value, then the item is included in the new array that is returned. So essentially what's going to happen is that, just kind of like the other two functions, the item in the array one by one will be passed to this function that I give filter. And every time that function returns true, that item gets added to a new array. Okay, so if I do fixed array, we'll say const filtered array, because this will be the result of filtering, dot filter, fixed array equals fixed array dot filter, and then once again I pass out a function. Okay, so that's what makes these callback functions, because the argument to the function is a function, and when you pass a function as an argument, that's referred to as a callback. Okay, so in this case, again, the function is going to receive the array item, and in this case, what I want to do is just double check, like, well, actually, let's just do this. If I return true, so if every time it always returns true, then pretty much every item is going to get to stay in the array. So if I do console.log filtered array, we're going to see that every item is still in the array. Okay. Oops, that's not what I meant to do. Okay, node array of objects. So you can see like all the things are still in the array. Now watch what happens if I return false. I'm going back an empty array, because then nothing, the function returns false every time, so nothing gets to stay in the array. So you see an empty array. So that's the idea behind filters. Basically, based on what that function returns, it'll determine whether a particular item stays or doesn't stay in the new array. So what I want to do is check out, hey, I only want people who are age 18 or older. So then what I would do is I would say, okay, return array item, and I know array item are those objects, because you should know what your data is. So array item dot age is greater than or equal than 18. So then for each, it'll pass in like the Alex object and say, okay, is this, and then the function is going to return true or false. Then it'll go to the next one, and then watch what happens. Now notice, see, this array only has 2 items because it got rid of the person who was 17. They did not pass the filter. Okay. When I went to them and I said, okay, hey, array item dot age, is it greater than or equal 17? This came back as false, so this was not included in the new array. So filter is a really good way to like filter array, really useful for when you're doing like a search feature, because then you can like search through the full results and then create an array of the filtered results and then display that filtered thing on the screen. So that's pretty useful. Cool. Then you have like sum and every. So this is generally cool if you want to try to like see if something is true for all the arrays. Like one useful thing is like what happens, you might have a missing property. So for example, if I go back here and let me just using the original array, let's pretend that like one person has a property of, we'll say graduated high school, and we'll say it's true. The problem is not all of them have this property. Okay, so the problem is if I have like a function, if I plan on doing things that plan on using it, because this is going to happen a lot where you have objects that don't match, like they have many of the same properties, but one may not have a property. So then what happens is that you run the function that loops over all of them. One of them will try to use a property that doesn't exist and you get an error, even though the property exists there some of the time. So, what I can do is I can use if statements. So I can be like, okay, well, do I want to bother doing this? Only if all the things have the property. So I can be like, okay, hey, if, we'll say the original array, so we'll say array of objects dot sum, or let's say dot all, actually it's every. Okay, and every is going to return me true if the function that I give it returns true every time. So just like all the other functions, I'm going to give it a function, and that function on every loop will receive the item. So I can call it, we'll say array item, but you can call it whatever you want. And I'm going to return, and then I need to return true or false based on whether I think that passes my test. In this case, my test being returns, array item dot graduated high school. So what this is going to do is that for each item, it's going to say, okay, hey, is this truthy? And again, generally, if that property has a value, which means it's worth something, then it'll be truthy. And if it's undefined, because it doesn't have that property, it'll be falsy. Okay, and then I can be like log all objects have the property. Okay, and let's just see that at work. And you see there's no console log because two of them don't have this graduated high school property. But if I change this to sum does the opposite. It's not every single one doesn't have to match, only at least one has to match. So long as true comes back for one of the items. So it's kind of like, someone's going to a rated R movie. Long as one of those people is an adult, then they're all good to go. So this will return true as long as one time the function returns true. So see in this case, well actually I should say some objects have property. Because this time we're using sum. And see sum, because only one of them is going to have the property. So as we can see here, like Josie, if we go back to the original one right here, see like Josie has graduated high school. So that's how sum and every work. Is basically you're asking yourself, like, is this true for everything in the array? Is this false for everything in the array? Or is this true for at least one thing in the array? Okay. Then there's like find and find index. And this is great when you need to find an index of a particular item, because sometimes there's no better way. And the problem is like something like an index of has to have like a perfect match. So you have to like pass like, if you're comparing numbers, or you actually have to pass the whole object if you have the whole object. But if you don't have the exact object, okay, and it's hard to really kind of capture what I mean by saying the exact objects. I mean the referentially exact object. It's kind of hard to use index of with objects in an array. But we can always do something like this. Okay, so here we'll just say const the item equals, and then we'll come back to that, const index equals, because what find does is going to find you the actual value of the first thing in the array that matches your function. So if I do, we'll say the fixed array dot find, and then I say, hey, I want you to find me, the first person under age 18. So return, and then here I'm just gonna say item from now on instead of typing in like array item. I think you guys get the idea now. So item dot age is under 18. First, give me the first person who's under 18. Okay, and then find index will get you back the index. So the only difference between find and find index is just what comes back. One will give me the actual object, one will give me the index in the array, which can be useful for like a splice. So now if I console log these, I shall do the index first. I console log this. See, some objects have, 2. See, it's index 2, and then here's the object from the find. Okay, so that's how find and find index work. They can either get you the thing that matches your callback, or they'll get you the index of the thing that matches your callback, which again can be really useful when you have a bunch of objects and you're trying to find a particular object. And usually, again, when you're working with like data from a database, generally each thing's gonna have like its own unique ID. So you're gonna say, hey, go find me the thing that has whose ID matches this number. Okay, and last we'll talk about reduce. Reduce is like a cumulative operation. So let's give you an example. Let's say I want to add their ages. So const sum of ages. We'll say equals, we'll take the fixed array dot reduce, and generally actually again it's going to take a function, and then we, as a second argument, this one takes a second argument, which is going to be the value, the starting value. So we're going to say start counting at 0. Okay, and then on each loop, that 0 starts what's called the accumulator. So the idea is that this thing accumulates over each loop. Okay, and then on each loop, we are also going to receive the next item in the array. So what I want to do is, starting with 0, on each loop, I want to return the result of taking the accumulator, which again starts at 0, because that's what we said. We said it starts at 0, the second argument, equals accumulator plus the item's age. Okay, and then that should add them all up. So if I console.log sum of ages, watch what happens. I get 88. The reason being is that what's going to happen is on the first loop, 0 plus 37, okay, which is going to equal 37. Then it's going to be 37 plus 34, which is going to be 60, 71. And then it's going to be 71 plus 17, which is going to be 88. Okay, and that's how we get the 88 number. But again, it's not just for counting numbers. You could also do it with like, we'll just say like all names. So if I were to create like const all names and I wanted to create one string with all their names, I could do something like this. I could do, again, fixed array dot reduce. And then what we're going to do is, again, we have to start with a function as the first argument, and the second argument as a starting value, which should be an empty string. And then, again, we take the accumulator, each item. And again, in this case, the accumulator starts out as an empty string. And then I'm going to say return return accumulator plus the item dot name. So what it's going to do, and then we'll actually add a space. So that way there's a space between the names. But now if I console log all names, this variable we created over here, what you're going to see is that on each loop, we're adding all those strings together and we're going to have all the names on one line. So you see that right there. Alex Merced, Bob, Josie, all on one line because first it looped over Alex Merced, took the empty string, added Alex Merced to it, and a space. Then it went to the second loop, took that string that as it was with Alex Merced, added Bob in a space. Then it went through the third loop and then added Josie and the space. Okay, so that's how reduce works. So it allows you to kind of like take a bunch of things in an array and do a operation that accumulates across all of them, reduce them into one thing. Okay, whether you're reducing it to one number, one string, whatever. There's some clever ways to use it. Hopefully that kind of gives you a lot of leverage there. Okay, and then the last one I want to say is we'll do a sort. And sorts the array. Okay, and this one always can be a little tricky to kind of like fully like understand. Well, let's see here. If I do console.log fixed array dot sort, and what it does is it's going to take a function, which is going to be like A and B, so the first item and the second item, and it's going to return something, and you want to return something that allows it to figure out like, hey, should this basically it should return like -1 or 1. Okay, generally you're going to want to return. Let me think about this. So generally, traditionally, you want to sort things like numerically. So if I did like 5 minus 7, you'd end up with -2, which should be correct. So generally, if it's a negative number, then it won't flip it. But let's say like the numbers were like 7 and 5, so 7 minus 5 would be 2. So if it's a positive number, it'll swap them. So that's the way I always like to think about this. So I'll just say like, I always like just do an if statement. So I will do something like if a dot age. Well, in this case, you don't even have to. You can just return a dot age minus b dot age, and this should minus. And the idea is that again, it's going to be a negative number if they're in the wrong order. So like if the future age is smaller. So for example, if we get up here, 37 minus 34 is going to result in a positive number, so those are going to get swapped. And then 37 minus 17 is going to result in a positive number, so they're going to get swapped until they are and then you will get that. So then if I console log that, let's see what happens. You should see now they're in order from the youngest to the oldest. But you can see I can sort it on a particular property. I can kind of come up with it, give it a way to kind of sort in a particular way. But generally the idea is you want it to return like a positive number whenever you want it to swap, a negative number whenever you want it to not swap. So you have to kind of think about how you want to sort it and then write the logic that'll return like the right kind of number depending on what you want the result is. But you could technically sort an array any way you want. An array of objects any way you like. So those are all the main like callback methods. They got a lot of power. Especially map and filter are like gold. and you can never practice these particular methods enough. So I'll leave it at that. I'll see you all later. Have a great day and enjoy.